everyone, and welcome back to The Lone Conservative. We have a really awesome guest on today. I teased her in the Monday episode of The Lone Conservative, Danii Edwards. Danii, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, Danii, you recently had an article that received a lot of clout on Lone Conservative, and I wanted you to talk about it a little bit because it's pretty relevant with the Women's March having happened January 19th. Your article is about, I believe in 2016 during the inauguration, your personal experience with the first Women's March. So before we kind of delve into talking about the Women's March more generally and the issues that surround it, I just wanted you to give people your experiences at the Women's March. What happened to you?
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of a long story, but I'll try and sum it up. So I went on a school trip to the inauguration with a group of 15-ish. We were just supposed to be there to tour, see Donald Trump take office, and head back home. We weren't supposed to be involved in the march at all. What happened was the day before we realized that our tour guide, who was assigned by the company, wasn't really for Trump at all, kind of hated the fact that we were. So the day before, my mom and our other chaperone had gotten separated from the group. She had a really hard time getting us back together. Me and my friend Richard actually had to take charge just to make sure we found out where we were, because in D.C. during the inauguration, there are different gates to get in. And because there's so many people, it can be really complicated to navigate and with phone service and things like that. So we'd already kind of noticed she was really difficult and didn't really like us. And then it kind of took a turn for the worse. During the last day we were there, so the day after the inauguration, we were touring the Natural History Museum, and we were supposed to go from there to the Air and Space Museum and then head to the airport. So that morning, we had loaded up all our stuff, and the only things we had on us were what we were wearing and like a purse or our phones. We didn't have anywhere to put the merchandise we were wearing. So some of us were wearing inauguration hats, some of us were wearing MAGA hats. I had a Trump scarf on. But I'm just saying that now so you know, we had nowhere to put this stuff. We had to wear it. And so we were leaving the Natural History Museum, and as we were nearing the people in the march, we were discussing not to go into it. We weren't going to talk to the protesters, retaliate. If they said anything, we were to just keep quiet and get to where we were going. Then Sally, our tour guide, she told us that we had to cut through the march because it was going to be a shortcut, and she wanted us to see this. Now, once again, we were in MAGA hats, Trump scarves, things like that, and she wanted us to go straight through the sea of pink hats. And my mom immediately was like, no, this is not happening. We're going to go around. But when your tour guide is telling you what you have to do, you can't really say no. So we were like, okay, whatever, we'll just kind of make a break for it. We'll go straight through, and we'll try and get out as quickly as possible. So then, as soon as we were in the march, it was completely immediate. Protesters were calling us Nazis, they were calling us racist, members of the KKK, and the problem was we had barriers around us, so they had those metal fences kind of keeping the march guided, so we couldn't just cut straight through. We had to navigate and go forward with the march, and it took us a really long time to finally escape that little barrier section. And while we were in that barrier section, we had people throwing coffee on us. My hair was grabbed. Some of it was actually ripped out, which was it hurt a lot. I had bruises on my arm. There were these two ladies, I remember, who were kind of perched up on the barriers, and they told us that we deserved to die, and if we didn't get out of there, they were going to come personally teach us a lesson.
They sound like very nice people, by the way.
Oh, completely nice people. So then we decided we were going to kind of take a pit stop in the National Archives. And while we were getting out, a man had his wife take a picture of us while he was flipping us off. And we had people videoing us, screaming at us. And as we got into the National Archives, we were hiding out in a corner, waiting for our shuttle bus to kind of hear where they were, get a reading on everything. And they couldn't get to us, so we had to go to them.
Ugh.
After already experiencing all the things we did, we had to go to the metro station. And as we were descending the escalator, this woman tried to grab Richard, who I've mentioned previously, and yank him down. During that period of time, we were actually posted on the Women's March story, the Snapchat story back when they had those. and you could see us in our red hats and everything as someone was yelling and talking. So after all of that, and there's so much more. There was so much being said. We were told we deserved rape. I know one of the African American girls in our group was getting called the N word. It was absolutely ridiculous what was happening to us. I cannot explain the amount of terror and just how degraded and dehumanized we felt in those moments. We had no idea what these people were capable of, what they wanted to do to us. We just knew that they hated us and they didn't want us anywhere near them.
So when people were saying these things to you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when people were saying these things to you, was anyone from their side going like, nah, that's not cool, or trying to get them to calm down?
I want to say we had like maybe a few people that were like, hey, I'm so sorry. I know one girl was like, y'all need to get out of here. And the whole group kind of argued on what she meant by that. Cause it was tone of voice. So we didn't know if it was like hey, y'all need to get out of here. Someone might like hurt you, or if it was like, y'all need to get out of here cause I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think there definitely were people that weren't yelling at us and were doing their own thing, but it wasn't the majority. It was definitely, I didn't know how mob mentality worked. I didn't know if I necessarily believed in it until I was caught in it, until I witnessed it firsthand.
I've experienced what mob mentality can be like. It's a very scary feeling, because like like if you ever watch, I'm a nerd, so I watch this stuff all the time. If you ever watch like those nature documentaries, specifically about insects, and they talk about how insects kind of have a hive mind, they know what the others want to do, and they act kind of as one unit. When you experience mob mentality, from what I've seen, it's a lot like that. It's people act as if they're just one unit. Maybe there's a few dissenters, but overall, it's kind of a herd. And it gets really frightening and really scary really fast.
Like one thing my mom she was kind of digging into this point that like these people were women. They were mothers, teachers, daughters. I mean, these people completely like crossed the board in all of their careers. Like these are everyday people and they were attacking us. And it just goes to show like when you're in those situations on either side, it is so easy to flip that switch. And it is so easy to be driven by hate and be driven by that hatred of the other side that you don't even realize who you're speaking to and who you're talking to. And so it kind of made me realize and take a step back, like it doesn't matter what side anyone is. It doesn't matter what politics they are. Honestly, it doesn't matter like their race, their gender, their ethnicity. It doesn't matter their sexual orientation. Like these people are people, regardless of what you believe. You have to respect them as human beings. And you have to respect, their personal space. You have to respect their body. And you absolutely should never, never suggest that anyone deserves physical assault or mental abuse or like anything across the board. They deserve to at least be able to live and believe what they do.
No, and that's a really good message. And I've noticed, I wanted your take on kind of broader left-wing protests. I've noticed the right has started to develop these issues. For example, the Proud Boys, where people are getting more willing to be physical at protests or with people on the other side. But from what I've seen, when it comes to getting physical and when it comes to getting violent over the past decade, it's been a predominantly left-wing issue. So my question to you is do you think this is kind of a broader left-wing problem when it comes to these sorts of protests? What can they do exactly to fix it? How can people on the right respond when they find themselves in that situation? Because I imagine, I've never been in that sort of intense situation. I imagine when you find yourself being surrounded by people who are saying they want you to be raped, it's sudden and it's a shock and it's a very scary experience. So how would you recommend people deal with that and respond to it?
Well, for starters, if you're on the side where you notice people on your side are getting violent towards the other side, the best thing you can do is step back and at least realize, like, I'm not going to be a part of this. I'm not going to contribute to this. No matter how angry you feel towards that person or their beliefs, it will never be the right answer to physically hurt them. That is just never going to be the answer. And if you're on the other side, like I was, when we all agreed that we weren't going to say anything or we weren't going to respond, that was the smartest decision I believe we could have made. Because had any one of our people in the group responded or threw a punch back or said anything under their breath that someone picked up, it could have been so much worse for us. My well, he is my vice principal, or he was our vice principal the next year. But the administrator, and he was saying, like, he genuinely feared for his life, because had any of us retaliated, it could have been so easy for one of us to accidentally be killed, just because it would have piled on. Someone would have thrown another punch, somebody else would have, and they would have seen, oh, these kids in MAGA hats, they must have started it. They're at a women's march. They don't believe what we believe. So obviously they're the one that threw the first punch. It could have turned so much worse. So the best thing to do when you're in those situations is to turn your back, to not look them in the eye, and just keep moving forward and get out of the situation.
So you spoke about how your tour guide, Sally, wasn't necessarily a big fan of y'all's, and how she kind of sympathized more with probably the sentiments of the Women's March than Donald Trump or what you guys were espousing. It sounds to me, and this is just how I take it, so I wanted your opinion on it, having been there. It sounds to me like she intentionally led you guys through the Women's March to stir something up, because, again, she wasn't a huge fan of you guys. Did you get that feeling from her? Do you think she intentionally led you guys through there to rile you guys up, or what was the deal there? Or was she just that incompetent?
Well, we all kind of had our own theories, I guess. Some people were like, she absolutely meant for this to happen. Some of them were like, no, she's just that stupid and incompetent. However, my belief was that she just kind of wanted us to see her side. I don't think she intended for us to get physically assaulted. Mm-hmm. I don't think she expected her side to do that, if that makes sense. She wasn't awful to us. She made it very clear that she didn't agree with us. And so I don't think she meant for us to get hurt, but I think she wanted us to be surrounded by them. And I think she wanted almost to change our mind, but she was too incompetent to realize that was the worst thing she could have done. And so our school did, we originally were going to sue the company, but we ended up just getting the tour guide fired. We all sent in our statements. So Sally no longer works for that company, and she will no longer be leading students into the middle of women's marches. That's the good news. But yeah, I don't think she necessarily had horrible intentions, but she didn't have the right intentions, if that kind of makes sense.
No, I understand. And time and time again, when we look specifically at the Women's March and when we look at their leadership, it seems as if, I don't like to attribute motive to people. I've made that a constant point on the podcast. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the Women's March leadership and you look at how a majority of people who are involved in the Women's March act, whether it be through verbal or physical means, they never come across with the best intentions. They always seem as if they make the other side out to be some evil boogeyman, and that any behavior, or just about any behavior, against them is justified. So we've gone into a lot of the specifics of what you experienced that day, and if you wanted to get into anything else, feel free. But I wanted to know, what are your kind of broader perceptions of the Women's March? Is this representative of the left at this point? What can the left exactly do to condemn these people if it's not?
Well, I think it's a very eye-opening situation when a 16-year-old woman gets attacked at the Women's March. I mean, that kind of answers that question, you know? I think the Women's March is completely, the leadership, a lot of the people marching are horrible people. Like, that sounds really bad to say, but I mean, it's true. You have Linda Sarsour, who, I mean, when you see her Twitter, you see like her past. She's extremely anti-Semitic. She's racist. I mean, she does not in any way support all women. I don't think the left saw that at first. The DNC, for instance, just kind of disassociated with them. And so I think people are starting to see what they're really about. But like I said in my article, in 2016, when I was going through it, nobody saw through it. Nobody wanted to report on what happened negatively. They all wanted the Women's March to seem like this positive thing, but it's not. If it was really a women's march, people wearing MAGA hats, especially women, wouldn't have gotten assaulted there. They would have been supported for being women with their own opinions.
So I saw some people responding to your tweet with this the other day, and not just your tweet, but I've just seen it in responses of people who don't support the Women's March in general. They say that if you aren't on the left, if you don't support the things that the Women's March is specifically marching for, which would be to be pro-choice, which would be to have abortions, which is third wave feminism, then you don't count as a woman. You're just not, you have your woman card revoked, I guess. What do you think of that sentiment?
well, it's very obvious I'm a woman. So that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, oh, you're not a woman because you don't believe in what we believe. That's not totally true. Like, that's not actually true at all. However, when they say things like, you don't believe what we believe, well, they believe in equal rights. I believe we already have them. So what's the point of marching for something we already have?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they want to talk about the wage gap, I don't believe there is one. So why would I march for something I don't think we need to fix? They think that some of the women's rights are rights that shouldn't be there. I don't believe that we should be murdering innocent babies in the womb. And they think that's a woman's right. So of course they're going to think that I'm against women's rights. But it's all ridiculous when it comes down to it. The worst opinionated women and the best opinionated women, we all share one thing, and that's that we're women. You can't take that away from someone just because you disagree with them. But it's just not how science works at all.
And that's one of the things that always just irks me when people like it's the same thing when you'll see black conservatives go up against even white liberals. It's like they try to take away their quote unquote minority card. They'll try to. They actually have a term they call it a black card. They'll try and take away their black card. They'll try and take away a woman card. It's if you don't agree with them and their victimhood mentality, then you don't deserve to be in what they consider to be that victim group. And it's pretty deplorable. But you talked about how the DNC now, and I just recently read this, has disassociated themselves from the Women's March. A lot of people on the right, and I don't know how you feel about this. I've actually never asked you about it. But a lot of people on the right have said that the anti-Semitism and the anti-masculinity narrative that we've seen promulgated amongst the Women's March and in their leadership is a deep-seated problem within the left as a whole. So even though the DNC and some other left-wing groups have distanced themselves from the Women's March, would you say that the broader left, that the Democratic Party has some sort of issue with being anti-masculinity and with anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. 100%. There's no question. I mean, we saw with like AOC, for instance. I mean, there's this gigantic attack on quote unquote toxic masculinity. And there's a fight between the right and the left on the definition of that. The left honestly just believes if you're a man, you're toxic. Like, that's just kind of it. If you're a man, you're toxic. Especially if you're a white male, you're toxic. The right is saying, hey, like, there's some masculinity that's really healthy and really good. And when you're talking about gender roles, things like that, there are some things men should do. And that doesn't make them toxic. That just makes them human beings that are being natural with their instincts. The left is trying to take that away, suggest that we're all the same, and that if a man is acting different or out of place to them, it means they're toxic. So I do think there is a deep-rooted problem with like this war on masculinity. They are definitely anti-Semitic. We've seen them. I cannot think of her name. She's one of the leaders of the Women's March. She refused to say, is either one of the leaders of the Women's March or a senator. I cannot think of her name, but she refused to say anything negative about the Women's March's anti-Semitism. Like, how hard is it to say, I don't hate Jews? Mm-hmm. Like, it's just not hard. And they just wouldn't do it. I definitely think there's a deep-rooted problem. I don't know how to fix it. I think this is a tipping point in America, especially with politics, and it's kind of scary.
Well, they're following Louis Farrakhan off a cliff, which is a sad reality. But the thing that I really wanted to ask you, and I guess it's getting to the broader, more general point, is a lot of conservative political commentators have posed this point, and even a lot of left-wing commentators who are on the complete other side have posed this point, is that what once was a universal set of American values, what once was a few points that both sides could kind of come together and agree on, it's like that doesn't exist anymore. And the reason that I'm bringing this up, I know it's kind of a deeper philosophical question, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think the Women's March, the outgrowth of it, and the unwillingness for many on the left to distance themselves from it, like the DNC, I'll give them kudos for distancing themselves from the Women's March, but they still have a lot of the underlying problems in their organization and in their ideology that are present in the Women's March. They're just not associated with that group anymore. What do you see, just in a broad sense? You don't need to give like a super nuanced answer. I'm not expecting that. This is like off the cuff. But what do you think is going to happen here? because both sides keep on just growing further and further and further and further apart. And it's getting very difficult now to have a semblance of civil discourse when one side is convincing their children and the people who are around them that the other side is just pure evil, and the only reason they believe what they believe is because they want others to die.
Oh goodness. Yeah, I have two sides to this. I think in some ways it's showing that our country is working the way we wanted it to. People are able to think freely. They're able to form their own opinions. We're seeing this divide because we're like, with social media growth and things like that, people are able to get news in a new and different way. They no longer have to like read the newspaper and get the generalized idea of things. They can search really deep into their beliefs. However, with that also comes anyone can write an article, or anyone can write or make a website of things, and you can find evidence to support your opinion regardless of what it is. So you have this, like, with this new generation, and I'm part of it, I'm Gen Z, is all of these people have their opinions, and all of them completely think they're right. So when you have two sides that completely think they're right, nobody wants to change their mind, no one wants to find common ground. And so when you go into debates, especially with like people my age, they're not there to change their mind or be questioned. They're there to ridicule and degrade the other opponent on both sides. They're like, I'm smart, I'm amazing, I know what I'm talking about because I read articles or I watch the news, I'm informed. So you don't have that general fight for common ground like you used to, where everyone was kind of like, let's compromise on our issues. Let's find where we can meet in the middle. Now it's just, I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm going to keep fighting and saying I'm right till you give in, and nobody gives in. And so it's just this complete, like, I just think it's this weird place where in some ways it's really good that people are becoming more involved. It's also completely scary because they don't know what they're talking about for the most part. So I think it's interesting. I don't have an answer for how things are going to turn out. I just think we're kind of screwed. But it could be a turning point in America again where we find out, hey, this is really working, and we finally come back to common ground. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's one of the places that I'm most concerned is usually I'd have more confidence that there's going to be some sort of boomerang effect or some sort of pendulum effect where eventually both sides start drifting back toward the middle. And I'm by no means a centrist myself. I just understand that a majority of the population being centrist is much better than a large minority, if not a majority of the population being far, 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 far to the left. I'm more concerned about it at this point because I think we see there's a lot of indoctrination going on, specifically on college campuses, even in high schools. Like, no one focuses on indoctrination happening in high school, political indoctrination. But it happens because teachers often and professors often use their position of authority to make kids come around to their way of seeing things. And there's like this whole thing in political science that says you are most likely to take after the philosophy of your parents. That's what's most likely going to happen. But the issue is, from what I've seen, this is anecdotal. I haven't seen any official studies released on this now at this point. But from what I've seen in my high school and with my experiences, a lot of people who had conservative parents or who have conservative parents, it's not just that they're undecided. They are vehemently, rabidly to the left. And it seems as if the conservative values their parents tried to implement just have no effect on them. So I'm more concerned about it not going back to normal because of this whole indoctrination thing and how the left has taken over teachers' unions and teachers and professors. But we'll just have to see how it turns out.
So yeah, when we, in the 90s and everything, we kind of, I can't think of the correct term, but actually I can. In the 90s, we were talking about the culture wars, and the conservatives pretty much lost it. And that's when you saw this uprising in liberalism in the media, in TV in general, just in everything, in academia and all across the board. And so of course, people are going to be leaning towards that. So regardless of regardless of their parents' beliefs and everything, when you're in a classroom all day and you see your parents for a couple hours and they may not even be with you those couple hours after school, they might be doing their own work. You may not be sitting down to eat dinner together. There's different aspects. You don't really see your parents as much as you're seeing your teachers. And so when your education's being influenced, when you turn on the TV and you're being influenced, when you go on your phone and social media is influencing you, it's pretty easy to see why these kids became more left-leaning. And in some ways that is a good thing, and in some ways that is a bad thing. We're seeing a lot more acceptance in a lot of different aspects, and we're seeing, at least I believe in my generation, we're seeing more of an understanding of people. Like, we're just being more accepting with sexual orientation, with race, with gender, the good and bad aspects of that. But there's definitely some bad things with economics. And it's gonna be really interesting. I definitely think losing the culture wars was the worst thing that could happen to conservatives, and especially the generation that raised Gen Z.
Well, speaking of the culture wars, and then I'll make sure this is the last thing, but speaking of the culture wars, we've actually seen what many are calling a resurgence. It's really only been over the past 4 years, 5 years. We've seen a resurgence in the culture wars between the left and the right. It's like culture wars 2.0. How do you see that going as of right now? Like, just from what your perceptions are, do you see the right prevailing this time, or do you see it as status quo, left's going to win out in the end?
Alrighty. I have a lot of opinions on this, and I'm not sure I'm going to sound the absolute smartest, so I apologize. This is going to sound crazy, but I do think we're gonna win this. I think we're going to start seeing an uprising in conservative values again. In one way you can almost see this is through, this is going to be interesting to say, but through apps like TikTok. You see my generation in particular. I mean, there's this crazy sector of TikTok where everyone's making TikToks about Ben Shapiro and about women's rights and being, kind of pushing back on the third wave feminism, pushing back on pro-choice values, on things like that. You're seeing this weird sector of like conservative TikTok. And as crazy as that sounds, it's almost like this win in my head. Even at the March for Life, the majority of the people attending were young people. I think because the left has like almost won the first culture wars, and they're on the rapid decline because they're getting crazier and crazier and more, they're straying so far to the left that it's scaring people. I think we're seeing a kind of pushback towards the right. I don't know how far that goes. I don't know if we're all going to kind of meet in the middle, but I definitely think my generation specifically is going to lean more conservative in the long run, just because we're seeing we're seeing a really weird time in politics, and I've never really seen anything else because I'm only 18, almost 19. So I don't know what it was like back when Reagan was president or Clinton was president, but I know right now is the weirdest time in political history, quite possibly.
Everyone needs to be as conservative as Ben Shapiro or the culture war is lost. We can just agree on that.
Oh, for sure. Oh my gosh.
But with that being said, I think we're just at our time here. So Danii, is there anything that you're working on that you'd like people to know about? And for more of the feisty, spicy takes and amazing memes, where can people find you on social media?
Oh, goodness. I can't think. I mean, I'm in my second semester of college. I'm kind of busy, so I don't really have anything super big in the works, but I'll be pushing out more columns. So you can find me on Lone Conservative's website. I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, and that's probably all I'll plug on here. But my Twitter is Danii Marie _13, DANII, and my Instagram is Danii.Marie. So again, DANII and then .Marie. So if you really, really liked this, you can go ahead and follow me there. I also help run Lone Conservative Instagram, and we'll always be posting spicy conservative memes. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks for having me.
No problem, Danii. Thanks for plugging on or coming on. And you didn't plug a Facebook, so now all the boomers are going to be very sad.
Oh, you guys don't want to see my Facebook. It's just my dogs. I'll leave that.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again for having me.
All right, guys. And this has been The Lone Conservative. As always, I'll see you all again next Monday. And until then, have an awesome week.